Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons. And normally we'd be coming to you on a Sunday morning. But since we're on the eve of the NFL draft, with the NFL draft starting up in a couple of days from now, we decided it'd probably be best to come to you guys sooner than we or later than we normally do, I should say, because we want to be closer to the draft. But enough of that. John, how are you this evening?
Yeah, John, how many times have we done this show and I've been like, oh, the draft's 5 weeks away. It's 4 weeks away. It's three,
Yeah.
right? No, hey, 2 days away, John.
Yeah,
two
now we're
days
2 days
away.
away.
Yes. And in New England Football Journal, too, we'll have you covered with post draft shows and recaps and all that stuff. So it's arguably, John, our busiest time of the year. I know we have the NFL season, we have the post game shows, all that coverage. Obviously, you do a great job with your local high school and college coverage, but I think you can make the case this is our busiest time of the year.
It absolutely is. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the other thing, too, is, Kevin Stone and I talked about this last night on the New England Football Show, that by the time you get to this point in the pre draft process, there is a sense of fatigue that starts to set in. I love this stuff, but I've talked to a bunch of people in the media, but just fans in general that are like, can this thing just already get here? I'm tired of talking about Will Campbell. I'm tired of talking about Abdul Carter, what they might do, what they may not do. I just wanted to get here and let's see what they do. And I think that generally speaking, that's kind of the mentality people have now. A couple of days out, they just want to see the Patriots pick a player at 4 or make a trade and pick a player wherever they end up landing in that trade. And the hope is that they get an impact player that can come in and make a difference. And that's where we want to start there. Of course, the last few weeks we've been previewing the Patriots' top needs. Their final top need, and what I think we universally agree is their most pressing need, their most important need, is indeed offensive tackle. Now, we've bandied about for weeks what they might do at pick 4. Do they stick at pick? Do they trade down? Do they trade up? Although I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's in the cards. But a trade down certainly is, depending on the offer and the team. But all that being said, offensive tackle has been their number one need probably going on 2 years now, if not longer. And I believe that this is a draft where they have to address it, John. It's not a position, in my opinion, I know you've agreed with me, it is not a position where they can kick the can down the road here. They need to come out of this draft with a starting caliber left tackle, whether they take that player in the first round, second round. I wouldn't wait past the second round. They need to come away with a guy that could step in and have a shot to compete for that job against Fedarian Lowe. When you look at this offensive tackle class, what are your initial impressions? And do you agree that it's a pressing enough need that they need to address it right out of the gate?
Yeah, first of all, I agree it's their biggest need right now on the team. And second of all, I mean, it's really been a need since 2022. It feels like that draft at a minimum since 2023 when we said, hey, they need a tackle and a corner, and they got the corner in Gonzalez and not the tackle. And then last year they need a quarterback and a tackle and a receiver. And they got the quarterback and they drafted 2 receivers, but no tackle, right? So finally, right, 3-4 years later, can they finally get the tackle? And look, I've said this on this show before, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, John, but I think the biggest question in this entire draft, it's not Will Campbell's arm length. It's not, who's in charge in the Patriots front office, whether it's Vrabel or Cowden or Wolf, whatever. The biggest question to me is how do the Patriots feel about those late first, early second round tackles? Because personally, I think there's some legit guys there. Like if Josh Simmons falls because of his injury, I think that's a really good player. I think Josh Connerly is a really good player. I think there's some other guys in that range, but I bring that up because if they feel good about 2 or 3 of those late first, early second round tackles, then it gives them flexibility at 4th overall to really do whatever they want, right? They could pick a Will Campbell, they could pick a Mason Graham, they could pick a Tyler Warren, an Ashton Genty, a Ted McMillan, trade down, whatever, right? Or Abdul Carter if he's there, of course. But if they don't feel good about those late first, early second round tackles, now all of a sudden, you kind of have to take a tackle in the top 10, whether it's at 4 or whether you trade down and take one. Now, that could be Will Campbell. It could be Kelvin Banks. Heck, you could take Josh Simmons there at 4, and I wouldn't protest that much. But my point is the defining question, the key question, those late first, early second round guys, if they like them, they can do whatever they want at 4. If they don't like them, then you kind of got to take one at 4. I personally think there's a couple, 2, 3 guys at least in that range to be had, but that's the biggest thing I'm watching by far with the Patriots in this draft.
I think when you look at the tackle position in this draft, I think it's about 12 deep. I think there's 3 tiers. I think tier 1 is obviously Campbell, Armand Membu, Josh Simmons. I think that's tier 1. You can easily get one of those guys in the top 10. Whether you stay at 4, if you trade down 4 or 5 spots, you could still get them anywhere from 8 to 10. You can get one of those guys. I think Campbell and Membu more than likely go in the top 10. I think Simmons probably goes in the top 15, maybe top 20. But something tells me he's going to go earlier than people initially thought, because despite the ACL injury, when you put on the tape, and you didn't see him necessarily play against the best competition at the end of the season during their playoff run, but when you put on the tape, he's impressive. He's got the arm length. He's athletic. He's fundamentally clean. There's really a lot to like there about Josh Simmons. And many will tell you, well, okay, if you take Josh Simmons at 4, that's a reach. I'm not so sure about that. Again, I say it all the time.
Sneaky good point, John, by the way.
Yeah. I've been covering this draft I've been covering the draft for 25 years, and I say it every single year. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Just because the media doesn't think Josh Simmons should go at 4 doesn't mean the Patriots don't take him at 4 or in the top 10 if they trade down. It would not shock me at all if Simmons win in the top 10. Not at all. And then there's that second tier, and this is to your point about are they comfortable with those guys at the end of the first round, early second round, Josh Connerly, Ariante Ursary, Ozzie Trapillo, Donovan Jackson. Those are going to be your early second round guys. And then there's that third tier of guys that probably go late second, early third. Guys like Charles Grant and Anthony Belton and Chase Lunt out of UConn, Cam Williams out of Texas, Wyatt Milam out of West Virginia. There's going to be that tier. So it's going to be interesting in my view. And look, I know this isn't going to happen, but you and I have been talking about this stuff now for weeks. In my view, if they could take 2 tackles with their first 2 picks, I would do it. I seriously would do it. I know it's not going to happen, but I would do it if I were them. I think it's that important of a need, because here's the other thing we got to keep in mind. Morgan Moses, he's a short-term answer at right tackle, 3-year, $24 million deal. Vidarian Lowe, free agent after next year. He's probably not in your plans long-term. I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't know that, but if one had to guess, unless he has a strong camp, wins the starting left tackle job, has a really good season, there's a good chance he may not be here in 2026. So all of that being said, in my view, there's 3 tiers at this position. I would not be opposed to them taking a tackle with their first 2 picks. I'm not kidding when I say that. Now, again, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think there's enough talent and depth where they're going to come out of this draft with a starting tackle. The question is, do they take that player at 4? Do they trade down and take that player? Or do they wait until round 2 and take that player on Friday night? Or perhaps do they trade back into the first round on Thursday night and take that player? That remains to be seen. It's a deep group, but as you know, with offensive linemen, particularly tackles, you can't wait. Once you wait and those first 10 go, then it really dips after that.
Yeah, and it feels like every single year, John, at some point there's that run on tackles, right? Some years it's in the first round, some years it's in the second round, but it always feels like there's that run, and you got to be careful about missing that run, because then, I mean, talk about reaching. If you miss that run, you really reach on a guy. And I think, a guy that the name comes to mind in that category, Caden Wallace, right? A guy that maybe wasn't part of that run last year on tackles, but the Patriots took him a little bit later. And I could see him, like, do they view him as, okay, Morgan Moses will be here for a year or 2 and Caden Wallace will be our starting right tackle after that, right? Or do they view Layden Robinson at left guard and say, he'll be fine at left guard, we're okay, so all we need is that left tackle? Because if they don't believe in those 2 guys, then you're talking about maybe you need to take 2 offensive linemen in your first 4 picks. But if they do, then maybe, you can stretch it out a little bit more, because I think we both agree they got a massive need at left tackle, and they have for a while. We all know it, but it goes beyond that. Like, they have uncertainty at center. They have uncertainty at left guard, and even right tackle. You're fine for 2025, but you do have some long-term uncertainty, and their evaluation of Caden Wallace, I think, could make a big impact on what you said earlier. When do they take that second tackle? Because I'm not going to be surprised if they take 2 tackles, but I think their evaluation of Caden Wallace is going to dictate when exactly they take that second one.
And I do think they need to come out of this draft with 2 tackles, whether they take one early and one on day 3. They need to add bodies to that position, left and right tackle, because at the end of the day, yes, I agree with you. You need to see what you have in Caden Wallace. You got a small sample size last year, but it wasn't enough. You need to see what you have in him. Can he play right tackle? Remember now, Mike Onwenu also comes off your books after 2026. So he only signed a 3-year, $57 million deal. So he's not here long term. And then they brought back Trey Jacobs, but we know we watched him play last year. It was a struggle for him at times. Don't think he's the long-term answer there. So I would not mind if they came out of this draft with someone that can compete for the left tackle job and someone who they can develop with some length to eventually be that starting right tackle. And again, this isn't a knock on Caden Wallace. And I know people get hung up on wingspan and arm length, but vertical length matters just as much, if not more, at the tackle position. Caden Wallace, you're looking at a guy that's 6'4", maybe 6'4" and change. It's a little bit of an issue for him. This is obviously going to be a big training camp for him. And they may have watched enough tape up until this point, John, and what they have in the building that they may say, you know what? Sure, we need 1 tackle, but we're not going to go out and overdraft here and draft 2 or 3 tackles. They wouldn't take 3. I'd be shocked. But could I see them taking 3 offensive linemen? Yeah. I mean, look, I would not be surprised if they drafted a guard.
No, especially again, later on. I wouldn't be at all.
Yeah. You have a lot of bodies there in the building, but the reality is there's a lot of bodies there that may not be on this roster come the end of August. They're going to evaluate all of them. They're going to give them a fair shake. But what do you do with Cole Strange? If Bradbury ends up your starting center, what does that mean for Cole Strange? What does it mean for Layden Robinson? What does it mean for City So? For Jake Andrews? There's a lot of question marks there. But one thing is for certain, they're going to take a left tackle. It's just a matter of, do they take that player at 4? Do they take that player a little later after a trade down? Or do they do what they did in 2001, take best player available or a defensive player with their first pick, and then come back in the second round on Friday night at pick 38 and take a tackle? I still think you could see something, and again, I'm not trying to make it about the local kids, but you could see a scenario where Ozzie Trapillo could be that player. He could be the player that they potentially target on Friday night with pick 38. We shall see. Of course, if they trade down, let's say, on Thursday night, they might have some extra ammunition to work with, and perhaps they can take a player in the second round, or as we said earlier, trade back into the first round. Obviously, there's been some speculation out there the last couple of days. The New York Giants, to me, that's where the draft starts at 3. I think that obviously Cam Ward's going to Tennessee at 1. Adam Schefter had that last night, that the Tennessee Titans have informed his camp that they're going to take him with the first overall pick. So their hope is that Cam Ward can be their franchise quarterback. At 2, I still think Cleveland will put the for sale sign on that pick. But if they don't get any takers, John, I think Travis Hunter is going to be the pick there. So in many ways, this draft starts at 3 with the Giants and what they do. And what they do will directly impact the Patriots. Because I still think, in my opinion, if the Giants surprise us, and I know there's been some division in their building in regards to Shedeur Sanders. They worked him out in person last Thursday. But I think if they take Shedeur Sanders at 3, now, I mean, when you look at the Patriots, now it's game on. Gone is the Will Campbell to the Patriots conversation. I really believe Abdul Carter could be the pick at that point.
Yeah, I think if he's there, it kind of feels like he would be the pick, but I still see the Giants kind of taking Abdul Carter. I don't know. I could see them, unless they really love Shedeur Sanders. And I think you mentioned that workout last Thursday. That kind of signals to me that there's real fundamental disagreement about what Shedeur Sanders can be. And also a sneaky little theory I have, John. Maybe they're working out Shedeur Sanders for that pick they have at the top of the second round and to trade up with that late into the first round. Because if the Giants don't pick Shedeur Sanders, then I look at the Saints at 9. Then I look at the Steelers, what are they at 20 or 21? That's kind of it, right? And maybe one of those teams likes Jackson Dart better. Or maybe the Saints say, hey, Derek Carr will be ready in time. We're fine. And they'll take a quarterback later. So it kind of reminds, it's not exactly the same thing, but like the Kenny Pickett thing, where it was like he was falling. And if Pittsburgh hadn't taken him, he would have fallen even further. Like I could see that with Shadur Sanders. So I could easily see the Giants taking Abdul Carter at 3, trading back into the first round. Like if Shadur Sanders gets to pick 22, trading back in and taking him there. So I think that's something that is a real possibility for them to do. And I think you're right, though. It kind of starts there because it feels like Cam Ward's 1, Travis Hunter 2. I personally think Carter's 3, but there is at least some flexibility there.
So I did some draft simulations yesterday, and that's up on anyfootballjournal.com. And I just went through 5 scenarios there. So the first simulation was the Patriots get a trade offer and they trade down. What do you do then if you trade down? If, let's say, Abdul Carter is the pick at 3, he's off the board, he's gone. Patriots are sitting there at 4. The phone rings. It's the Chicago Bears. They want Ashton Genty. They make you a trade offer. You go down to 10. Now you probably get a second-round pick out of that. I don't know if
I think you might get a second and something else, maybe a third or a fourth.
Or a future third, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you probably you don't get a future first. You talk at 6 spots, but I wouldn't be surprised if you got pick 10, their second-round pick. The Bears have been more than willing to trade picks in recent years under Ryan Poles. You get their second-round pick, and then perhaps you get a future third, maybe even a future second, depending on how desperate they are to land Genty. In my first simulation, I have them trading down. So let's use that trade as the impetus for the conversation here. If, let's say, they make a trade with the Chicago Bears and end up at 10, where do you see them going where do you see them going at that point? I mean, I still think if Will Campbell's on the board and he's sliding, I think he's the pick. I'm not sure it's Armand Membu because he's been linked to the Jets, but what do you see them doing if they, let's say, made a trade with the Bears and ended up at 10?
Yeah, to me, there's 2 names at 10 overall. It's Tyler Warren and Kelvin Banks. And Banks obviously is the best left tackle in college football last year. Played at Texas. He's a plug and play guy, I think. And the only reason I would say his name over Josh Simmons is he's not coming back from an ACL tear. But if you told me it was Simmons instead, I'm not going to argue that much. Tyler Warren, to me, that's a guy that I think can be an all-pro tight end within 4 years in the league and can be a guy that right away is going to play a lot. Within a couple of years is going to be your lead tight end. And he's going to be that guy. And you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, that a defense truly has to game plan around. And the thing is, you can take a Tyler Warren at 10, and with that extra second you get trading back, you can use it to trade back into the first round and get that left tackle that you want. Or maybe there's a guy at 38 that they like. But that's a scenario that I'm really comfortable with them doing, because I'd prefer a left tackle with their first pick. But if you're at 10 and you take a Warren and you have the ammo to move up and say get in the 20s and take a tackle there, then I think that, to me, that's kind of an ideal scenario for the Patriots.
Now, my second simulation had the New York Giants taking Shadur Sanders at 3. And in that simulation, I have the Patriots taking Abdul Carter at 4, like we just talked about. I think if Abdul Carter is there, again, depending on what the vibe in the room is, I know that there's been some red flags lately in terms of character. I think they're silly. I mean, I don't know if there's enough there to bypass him, but at the end of the day, I think if he's there at 4, John, I think the pull is going to be there internally to take him, because Elliot Wolf said this a while back. They're going to take the best player available. I think if that's the case, I think he's in play at 4. I think he's the pick, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it's either going to be Abdul Carter or they'd have to get a boatload of picks to trade down. Like, I would take a look at what, like, if they're going to get a second and a future first and another pick, trade down. Okay. But if it's kind of a similar offer to what we just talked about, if he's off the board, then I'd lean towards taking him. And then the issue with that, and I've already talked about, then you got to get that left tackle either trading into the late first or in that second round with your pick 38. And you got to get it right, because it could be like the 2001 draft where you had Richard Seymour and Matt Light, and you'd be really, really happy. But if you get that left tackle wrong, you and I are going to be sitting here next spring having the exact same conversation again. So I'm not against taking Carter there. I would take a look at the trade offers first. If there's nothing great that blows me away, I'll take Carter. But then the next thing I'm doing is seeing what is the soonest I can get that left tackle after that.
And we saw in the Super Bowl, in Super Bowl 59, Philadelphia absolutely dominated Kansas City up front. You can never have enough pass rushers. Certainly that helps. And if you can get base pressure and not have to commit bodies to your pressure packages, that's even better. If you can get pressure like Philadelphia did with 4 down guys, and your defensive coordinator can sit in the booth and play coverage and sip on his Diet Coke, you're having a really good day at the office. So certainly, I think if Abdul Carter's there, I do think it becomes a best player scenario, and I think they do take him. Simulation 3, I have the Titans taking Cam Ward. I have the Browns taking Abdul Carter at 2. Then I have the New York Giants taking Shadur Sanders at 3, which would leave Travis Hunter on the board potentially for the Patriots. If Travis Hunter is sitting there, should the Patriots take him at 4?
I would trade.
Assuming Abdul Carter's gone.
I would trade down in that scenario. And look, I think Hunter's a
If
terrific
the offer's there, though, right? What if there's no offer? Do you take him?
If there's no offer, that's a great question. I probably would take him there. And you can see I'm a little hesitant with it. And it's not the player. Like, I think Hunter's going to be a great player. It's just he's not going to play corner for the Patriots with Gonzalez and Carlton Davis there, at least in the next 2 years. I mean, maybe a few snaps a game, but that's not. So that means, okay, he's going to be your number 1 wide receiver. And I think he can be a really good number 1 wide receiver. I just look at it and say, okay, well, you signed Diggs. That's a short-term option. You still don't have that long-term number 1. You don't even really have a true number 1 now with Diggs rehabbing. But can you address that in the 2nd or 3rd round and take another receiver? That, like, I'm a little hesitant on Hunter, not because of the player. It's more so where the Patriots are at kind of in their development, and the fact that he's not going to play corner in New England based off what they have, unless he plays slot corner, because he's not going to play over Gonzalez. He's not going to play over Carlton Davis. So it's going to be receiver. And then it comes down to, yes, this guy will be a really good receiver, but if you can't protect the quarterback and he doesn't have time to get open, doesn't really help you at all.
I think his star is faded. I really do. I don't think, when you go back to January, the conversation surrounding Travis Hunter was much different. Okay, at that point, we're talking about him as a blue chip prospect.
Yeah. Is that a media thing, though, John? Like, is that an actual
I've talked to a couple of scouts, John, that have said to me that there's a lot of people around the league don't love him as a receiver. Okay. They think that he strictly should play corner. He's a better corner than receiver. One scout said to me that he's pretty much at his ceiling as a receiver. He's not going to be a guy. The explosive plays we saw here and there at Colorado, according to this scout, from what he told me, he said, I don't think you're going to see that as much in the NFL, if at all. So now you're talking about a guy that could still be a pretty good receiver, but now you're talking about a guy that's going to make plays for you about 15 to 20 yards from the line of scrimmage, but he's not going to be that explosive difference maker that we thought he could be, where he could take a slip screen 60 yards to the house. I'm not sure you're going to see that. And again, I think the consensus around the league with him is, yes, he's a really good athlete. He's a special player, but he's more of a corner than a receiver. And to your point, if you draft him now, you have to play him at corner. He'd have to step in and be your nickel. I know that you have Gonzalez and Carlton Davis, but he would have to play in your sub packages. The question is now, can you get more out of him at receiver to where he is worth taking it for? Again, we're talking about a position in receiver now that receivers are everywhere. The draft is going to be littered with talent all 3 days. That is the most overdeveloped position in the game right now because of 7-on-7s and spread offenses. So there's always going to be receiver talent. So I think that's the question the Patriots would have to debate. If they're sitting there at 4, there's no offer, and Travis Hunter's on the board, do you bypass him and say, you know what? Nope. Left tackle's a bigger need. We're going to take a tackle. Or do you say, man, he's too good a player to pass up on here. We're going to have to bite the bullet and take him. It would certainly make for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those, real defining questions of the draft. Because like I said, my first instinct, if it's Hunter there, is to trade down. And again, it's not against Hunter, the player. I don't think he's going to play corner here. He's going to be a really good receiver, I think. But in that spot, I don't know if I want them taking a guy who's going to be a really good receiver who still needs a little bit of polish on some of his routes there. That's all. It's like, again, I think he's going to be a really good or great player. It's just where they're kind of at. I don't know if the fit, whereas like the Browns, like they just gave Myles Garrett, $100 million or whatever. Like they don't need to take Abdul Carter. They can take Travis Hunter. It's just a little bit of a different place where they're at.
In scenario 4, I have the Titans taking Cam Ward, the Browns taking Travis Hunter, the Giants taking Abdul Carter, which would leave the Patriots with Will Campbell. I still think, if I were a betting man, John, I still think this is the most likely scenario.
I would agree. And I think from everything we've heard and it's been reported as well, they seem to really like Will Campbell at Patriot Place. And let's be honest with it, Will Campbell, and we're going to get into our mock draft in a little bit, and that scenario may just work out, but Will Campbell is going to be a great NFL player. Question is the key question, defining question, franchise altering question. Is it a guard or tackle? And look, if he ends up being an all pro guard for 10 years and you took him at 4, yeah, you and I will sit here and say, yeah, that was a reach. I mean, a guard at 4, but you know what? It's still valuable to have, right? It's still an important thing to have. And if he ends up being a good tackle, then I think you're in great shape. Personally, John, to be honest with you, I know this is a little outside the mainstream. If I'm at 4, I'm open to taking Kelvin Banks or Josh Simmons there. If you think they're going to be the better tackle, take them there. And in 5 years, if you have an all-pro left tackle and it's Josh Simmons, is anybody going to bitch and moan that you took him at 4 instead of 9 or 12? Like, I don't. I mean, you took Nate Solder a year early. People complained about that, but then all of a sudden he was a starting tackle on 3 or 2 Super Bowl winners. Like, so I'd be open to that.
This is an interesting conversation for me because I've battled evil forces over this now for going on 4 months. I'm more than comfortable with taking Will Campbell at 4. And here's why. I had a friend of mine reach out to me last night, and he's like, there's no way you could take a guard at 4 if he doesn't end up working out at left tackle and you have to kick him inside. You can't. Good luck selling that to the fans. Okay, here's my selling point to the fans. You draft him, you plug him in at left tackle. I don't think the wingspan and the arm length is going to be as bad of an issue in the NFL as people think it is. And if you think it's going to be an issue, Brian Baldinger did a little piece today where he did a little cut-up of Will Campbell versus Jared Verse, who got drafted in the first round by the LA Rams last year and had a really good rookie year for the Rams, okay? When you look at Jared Verse, with his length and his wingspan and how he can get under tackles pads, Will Campbell stoned him for the majority, if not all of that game. He controlled him. He negated him. The arm length didn't seem to be an issue against Jared Verse. And now here's the other reason why I would take Will Campbell. Guard is your safety net. If, let's say, he doesn't work out at left tackle, let's say that the arm length is an issue at left tackle in the NFL. Okay, so you kick him inside, and now potentially you have a Pro Bowl guard for the next 5 to 10 years. And you salvage the pick. That's the thing. We're not talking about Cole Strange here, where you drafted him as a guard, and now the only other place you can play him is center. You would salvage the pick at that point with Will Campbell. So I'm okay with taking Will Campbell at 4. I think he's a really good football player. I think he's athletic. I think he's fundamentally sound in terms of his technique. I think he has really good feet, and I think he can play left tackle. But if the worst thing that happens is you kick him inside to guard, and he ends up playing guard at a high level, and let's not forget now, right? You see where the game is going at the guard position. Look at how many guys that were tackles coming out of college have slid inside. Mekhi Becton is the latest example with the Eagles last year. Daniel Falele with the Baltimore Ravens. He was a right tackle at Minnesota. They drafted him, kicked him inside to right guard. My point is, even if it ends up playing out that way and he has to move over 2 feet and play left guard, so be it. If you get somebody who's, I don't want to say the equivalent to Quentin Nelson, but a comparable type player potentially at guard, I don't have a problem with that because you need to be solid and firm on the inside. A lot of your protection breakdowns, as you know, are not on the outside. You can work on your protection issues on the outside. Inside pressure is what destroys protections and gets quarterbacks hurt. If he has to slide inside, so be it. I'd be okay with it. I'm okay with them taking Will Campbell at 4. I actually would like that pick if they made it there. Plus the intangibles piece. I think he brings a lot to your locker room.
Yeah, and it's that old adage, right? You can scheme around one bad tackle. The problem for the Patriots last year is they had 2 bad tackles and a bad guard. So, couldn't really scheme. And they also had an offensive coordinator in his first year really doing it. So couldn't really scheme around that. Now you have right tackle solidified. I wonder if you have left guard solidified. I don't know if it's Cole Strange or Layden Robinson, what Mike Vrabel thinks of those guys. I think regardless, though, I mean, left tackle, you have that hole there. And even left guard. Even if you like Cole Strange or you like Layden Robinson, I think you and I could agree in the next year or two, Will Campbell's going to be a better player than both of those guys. So I think, even that being said, he could work it. I think at a minimum, he's going to be a great guard. If he can be a great tackle, then I think it's a no-brainer pick at 4. But that's why I would be open, like I said before, to taking a Banks or a Simmons, even if it's considered a reach at 4 if you can't trade down, because those guys are going to be, I think, good left tackles in the NFL.
I just think, again, the thing with Will Campbell that I love is his fundamentals, his technique. His hand placement is fantastic. His footwork and the timing of his punch is fantastic. Again, you go back and you watch his LSU tape. Yes, there were times where longer guys, particularly the Georgia guys, were able to extend on him, and they were able to stall him, and they were able to get into a secondary move. They would use that stab technique, and they would stop him in his tracks. But 95% of his tape, he's winning those one-on-one battles. His hand placement is inside. His footwork is impeccable. He's doing a great job of dropping his hips and anchoring to where now he stones that pass rusher, and he negates any opportunity for a secondary move. His tape is really clean. I mean, John, if we're talking about a guy here who has 33.5-inch arms, we're not even having this conversation.
Yeah, we would be talking about him like we talked about Joe Alt last year, right? Like same, like boom, no brainer, guy. Yeah.
He's a lock at 4 to the Patriots if his arms are 33.5 inches.
The only other caveat I'll add is, like, do they try to swing a trade with the Raiders for Colton Miller? Do they call the Chargers about Rashawn Slater, right? Speaking of Joe Alt, they didn't draft him to be a right tackle, right? Like long term. No. If they swing some sort of trade for a starting tackle, which is obviously less likely, then I think it takes Campbell off the table at 4. That's the only other caveat I would add.
I think it takes him off the table, but should it? I'll go in the other direction here. Let's say you do trade for Miller. The Raiders, let's say you trade with the Raiders. They move up 2 spots. They give you pick 6 and Colton Miller. And Will Campbell is sitting there at 6. Why not take him?
I wouldn't in that sense, because I think then, and again, be a good player. But I think in that sense, then all of a sudden, now at 6, I can take Tyler Warren and I can walk away from the first round with Tyler Warren and Colton Miller, and I'm feeling really good. Or Mason Graham even. Then I think I'm feeling, and I would take that guard maybe in the second round or the third round, of course, depending on what I think of Strange or Leighton Robinson.
I mean, again, maybe it's because I'm a line guy and I think that the game begins and ends there. I would not be opposed to them taking a Campbell at 6 if they ever made a trade like that, or an Armand Membu. You know what? The Jets love Membu. Beat him to the punch. Take him. He's got the requisite long arms everybody looks for. I think he can play right tackle and play it at a high level, even though he's 6'4". I do think with that arm length, though, and that lateral quickness, the way he moves laterally in the run game, I think he'd be a terrific fit for you long-term at right tackle. And he's another guy that down the road, perhaps you can kick him inside the guard. So, I mean, again, I think it's all about protecting the franchise here, and it's about Drake May. And, you mentioned Mason Graham. Okay, could they use another defensive tackle? Sure. Is he disruptive? Is he a difference maker? Is he a playmaker? Does he reset the line of scrimmage? Yeah, he does all that. He'd be a great fit in this scheme. But you just spent all that money on Milton Williams. You got Barmore coming back. I wouldn't invest a first-round pick in him. Tyler Warren, and I'm going to use that as the impetus to jump into my final simulation, which is Tennessee takes Ward at 1, Cleveland takes Hunter at 2, Giants take Abdul Carter. The Patriots decide to pass on Will Campbell, and now it's a choice between Warren, Genty, or a guy we haven't talked about. That's Jalen Walker. Where do they go here if it comes down to Tyler Warren, Ashton Genty, or Jalen Walker in this 5th scenario? What would you do if you were variable in Elliott Wolf?
I'd go Warren there. And I know that's high, but like Brock Bowers went top 10 last year and set the rookie record for a tight end. Like, and that's a position that especially in Josh McDaniels' offense, I think is supremely valuable to have. We saw it over the years, right? Whether it was Ben Watson and Daniel Graham and Jermaine Wiggins back with Charlie Weiss, or Ben Watson with McDaniels, and then of course Gronkowski, right? Or even think about the year they got out of Martellus Bennett in 2016, right? Like all these guys, have been really, really productive for them. I think they do like Jalen Walker. I like Jalen Walker too. I think he's a guy that you can put a little bit at inside linebacker. You can also line him up on the edge.
He can play on the ball, off the ball. He can do a lot of things in
yeah,
this scheme.
he reminds me of a more talented Anthony Jennings in 2020 because that was Anthony Jennings. Remember in 2020, he played inside linebacker, looked kind of lost at the NFL level. They moved him to edge. He's been one of the best run setting edges they've had in a long time. And I'd say in the top third of the league in doing that specific skill. So he's a better version of that, but it kind of reminds me of that. So that's a guy I do think they like him a lot. I would go Tyler Warren.
Yeah, I think in that scenario, I think Walker would be the pick. I really do. I think Walker.
And knowing Vrabel, I personally would go Warren, but I think you're right that they probably would go Walker.
Yeah, if they decided to bypass on a Campbell there, and you're talking best player available, if Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter are gone, I think Walker would be a more likely pick there than Warren. Look, I think Warren would satisfy the fan base. I mean, they've watched his Penn State highlights. He's been impressive. That would satisfy the fan base. And yes, he gives you a versatile piece. The one thing I would caution with Warren, though, I think his game is about 15 to 20 yards from the line of scrimmage. Sure, he could be a vertical threat in the red zone on seam and corner routes. But when you watch him play, he's a diverse playmaker, but he's not explosive. He's not a guy who's going to make big plays. And so my issue is where I would say he's different than Brock Bowers last year is Bowers is that detached why you can move him around. You can create matchups for him. He is a guy that can make chunk plays and perhaps the occasional big play. Tyler Warren can make chunk plays. I'm not sure, though, that there's enough giddy up there for him to be a big player. And again, I think tight end is an iffy proposition in the top 10. Sure, Brock Bowers was impressive last year, but then they didn't take him in the top 10. I believe they took him at 12.
Was it 12? I was going to say.
They took him at 12. So Brock Bowers was a top 10 talent as it turned out. But then there's the other side of the coin, and that's Kyle Pitts, who's done nothing in Atlanta. We've seen occasional flashes from him, but it's always a risky proposition, in my opinion, to take a tight end in the top 10. Very rarely do they pan out. I mean, you'd have to go back, unless I'm missing a guy, you almost have to go back to Vernon Davis when the 49ers took him with the top 6 pick. So it's a hit or miss position there. I think if they passed on Campbell and those other guys were gone, I think Jalen Walker could very well be the pick in a scenario like that. I don't see any scenario, despite Vrabel's affinity for running backs. I'd be shocked if they took Ashton Genty.
Yeah, me too. And again, I think he's going to be a great player. I don't think it fits where they're at.
You got two guys under contract for at least the next 2 years.
And just where they're at as an organization, because as good as he is, like if you can't block up front, there's going to be a ceiling on what he can do. I don't know. And I think you can get, much like what you talked about receiver earlier, I think you can get a not Genty level, but really good running back in round 2 or 3.
Yeah, and another guy, and I highly doubt he's in play, but another guy that could be in play, he is slipping a little bit, of course, is Tet McMillan,
it's another
the wide receiver out of Arizona. I don't see it. I know that they've been very open about their desire to acquire a big X receiver that can play on the backside, specifically on the backside of trips formations. Again, I don't see that, but that guy you can get in the second round. That could be Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, who I think is very comparable to Tet McMillan. And
that could be Trey Harris in the third round.
Yeah, might have a brighter future. And one thing that this draft is littered with is those big X receivers that can play on the backside one-on-one. And then that's a tough position, as you know. That's a tough position in terms of translating to the NFL. Just because a guy was productive in that role, we know this better than anybody with N'Keal Harry, just because a guy was productive in that specific role in college, X receivers with that kind of size don't always necessarily translate to the NFL.
Yeah, and that's a tough, because you're going to be singled up one-on-one, and the difference is in the NFL, every team, or just about every team, has one really good cover corner, and they usually stick them there, unless there's a specific matchup, with the Z or with the F or whatever. But yeah, it's tough, and I think you want a guy there, because a lot of guys in college at the X, they can win either with speed or with size and strength. At the NFL level, you have to be able to win with both of those things. Like you look at the good players at that position, the AJ Brown, right, guys like that, and Jamar Chase when they put him there in Cincinnati. I know he moves all around, but those guys are strong and physical, but they also are fast. Whereas, like you mentioned, N'Keal Harry, he was strong and physical. He couldn't separate from anyone. So at Arizona State, it was great. In the NFL level, it killed him. So I think that's the key there at the X. Is in college, you can get away with doing one of those two things. In the NFL, you have to be able to do both.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And again, I think it's a slippery slope with that position. There's a lot of talent within the receiver group this year at the X, but to your point, it doesn't always translate. And the other thing is, you got to remember, teams now are emphasizing, this has really been a thing in the NFL for the last 10 years. Teams are emphasizing length at those boundary corner positions. They've got guys that are 6 feet, 6'1", that have those long arms, that can punch, reroute, and play underneath guys in match coverage. So I think that's another part of it. You're not necessarily seeing those 6'1", 6'2" corners at the collegiate level on the backside as a boundary corner. You're getting the 5'10", 5'11" guys that you can dominate, especially in red zone situations. So I'd be shocked if an Ashton Genty or a Tet McMillan were the pick there. You are watching Patriots Pulse. I'm your host, John Sarianides. As always, I'm joined by my partner, John Lyons, and we're a couple of nights away from the first round of the NFL draft. We've been coming to you this offseason on Sunday mornings, but we figured it'd be better to do the show this week closer to the draft, so that's why we're coming to you tonight. So, look, I'll be honest with you. I used to be obsessed with doing mock drafts. Now I think it's an effing annoying exercise. I don't care for it anymore. My feeling is, John, everybody does one now. Everybody's got a mock draft. There's some people that will do one multiple times a week. God bless them. I don't know where they find the time. I don't have that kind of time to burn. I'll do one. We'll throw a couple up there by Thursday. But I, generally speaking, find mock drafts now in my advanced age to be fruitless and a waste of time. All that being said, we're going to do a mock draft.
Yeah, good segue, right, John? Right in.
Yes, yeah. Mock drafts suck. Now let's do one.
Yeah, so we're going to do a 7-round Patriots mock. Just going to share my screen here and get it rolling. And we are at pick 4. So, John, you're going to start with pick 4 for us. So, obviously, so far, Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, and Abdul Carter are off the board with the Patriots at pick 4 here. So, what are you thinking?
I'm going to piss off Patriot fans across the region. I think it's Will Campbell. I think he makes too much sense. I think you have to take a tackle. We've talked about this throughout the show. We've talked about this in previous shows. You have to address that offensive tackle position early. One thing I will caution is if you pass on an offensive tackle here, whether it's Campbell, whether it's an Armand Membo, whether it's a Josh Simmons, if you pass on a guy here, there's no guarantee that you're going to be able to get one later on in the first round if you trade back up, or even in round 2, early in round 2. Of course, they pick 38 in round 2 because, as you said earlier, John, and it's so true, there's always a run on tackles. I'm not taking any chances. I'm going with Will Campbell here. Guard is the safety net. I'm comfortable with it. I think he can play left tackle in the NFL. I think he can work with his arm length in the NFL. Doug Marone's going to coach him up. He's a good athlete. He's fundamentally sound. He's tough. He brings the leadership that room needs. And on top of that, if it doesn't work out at tackle, you have him move over 2 feet and he plays left guard and you salvage the pick. So Will Campbell's a pick for me.
Yeah, and again, as I said earlier in the show, and I've said all along, Will Campbell, I think, is going to be a great NFL player. We'll just see if it's a guard or tackle. If it's a tackle, that's ideal. If it's a guard, hey, is it a bit of a reach? Yes, but you know what? There is still value there, and I think more value than people give it credit for here. So I'll just slow down these picks a little in case there's anything that really catches our eye as we go, but that's Will Campbell. And again, it's something that, if you're looking at the Patriots offensive line, Campbell's a guy, whether it's a guard or tackle, you can plug him in, John, and you have at least one thing solved for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know people aren't going to necessarily see eye to eye with me on this, but guard for me is a safety net with him. It's a safety net. If it doesn't work out at left tackle because of the wingspan, because of the arm length, fine. He steps in 2 feet, and I think you get a Pro Bowl caliber left guard, and you're back in the same spot in a year or two from now, but at least one of your guard spots is solidified, worst case scenario.
Now, here's an interesting spot. So we're pick 38. I'm going to take the lead on this one. As you can see, the few picks before Matthew Golden, Donovan Jackson, and of course, Jaden Higgins, who you mentioned as a potential X receiver. But you got some really interesting names here, like James Pierce and Omar Norman Lott, two guys from that Tennessee defense, who I think, especially Lott, has flown way under the radar. And I think Kevin Winston, if you just look at him, he missed quite a bit of time. They only played 2 games this year, but he's a guy that can play free safety. He can play in the box. He's good against the run. Of course, again, it's limited playing time this year, but he's, another intriguing option for me, I guess, at least if you will. But the guy I look at here, and I'm going to say it wrong, Elik Amanor, wide receiver, Stanford. This is a dude, right? You look at him, 6'2", 210. He can play that X receiver. This was a Stanford offense that really, John, was not a very good offense overall. And you can see lined up in the slot, lined up out wide. He still had 63 catches for them in an offense that, frankly, was not that good last year. So I'm going to go with him there, pick 38, and I think he can be an X receiver for you for a long time.
Man, you've got some cojones there, my friends. I would not have passed up on James Pierce. I know there's a lot of question marks there with his motivation and he can run a little hot and cold, but you're talking about a guy that's 6'5", 245, length for days, explosive first step. We saw what he could do the last 2 years at Tennessee. I think he would have been a really good scheme fit in this Terrell Williams Patriots defense that they're going to run. But nonetheless, they've been very vocal, particularly Elliott Wolf, about the need to take a big receiver with size that can play by himself on the backside away from trips. I think Elik Amanor can do that. I think he's a guy that shows tremendous body control in one-on-one jump ball situations. He plays with good body control and balance. He's got strong hands, a wide catch radius. He's a guy that could be a nice matchup piece in the red zone, whether it be as an X or even if you line him up as an F and he runs your slot fade and you get him in that one-on-one situation, either against a slot corner or a safety over the top. I think he's a guy that can make a difference for you and give you a big body to go with what they have, because when you look at that Patriots receiving corps, John, you don't have a lot of size there. He would give you something you lack right now. I mean, Javon Baker is probably a similar player in some ways.
I don't think you can depend on him, though.
I don't think you can,
yeah.
right.
And just one note, so we're here at pick 69, and John, it's actually going to be your turn here, but I just want to say Andrew Makuba, who's there at 68 to the Raiders, if he was there at 69, he'd be a slam dunk pick for me. I would walk the draft card right up. I think he's going to be a legit free safety in the NFL and would be a great fit for the Patriots. Just not on the board here for us now, but if he is available at that spot, I would be all in on taking him.
Yeah, terrific player, a guy that can play at the third level. He can play on the second level. He can screw down in robber concepts. You can do a lot of different things with him. He can cover slot receivers. He can cover detached tight ends. He can match with backs. He was a jack of all trades at Texas last year. Of course, he formerly played at Clemson. So he's a player that I agree with you. Had he been there, I think he's a really solid pick, even though on paper, safety's not necessarily a need.
All right, John, pick 69. We got some options here. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, again, I think now you're getting to the part of the draft where you could potentially draft for the future at a position where you might have a guy whose deal is expiring after next year, and you want to add some depth and development here so that you could potentially replace someone in a year or two down the road. They could certainly do that at tight end. They could certainly do that at running back. They could certainly do that at corner. There's multiple positions that they can go here in terms of, finding players to not only add quality depth, but also finding players that can potentially start down the road. But I'm going to go with a guy that I know you're very high on and that you like a lot. And despite Norman Lott being on the board and him being very tempting, especially after passing on him and James Pierce earlier, I think if you're going to take a running back, this is a pretty good spot. I think this is where you could take a Dylan Sampson. He could come in, be a developmental back for you this year, get some touches, play behind Ramondre Stevenson, play behind an Antonio Gibson. And then really he could be the guy that could take over after Gibson's gone after next year and be that complement to Ramondre Stevenson. I think he's a guy that when you look at him, you're talking about 5'11", 200 pounds, straight line speed. He's a guy that if he gets into the second level, he could stick his foot in the ground, make a guy miss, and he's going to make a house call. I really like that part of his game. I don't think he has great footwork, and I don't think he has enough shiftiness as he presses the line of scrimmage to where he can make multiple cuts or make that one hard backside cut. But if he hits a hole and he gets on your second level and then he gets onto your safeties, he's gone. He's an impact back. He's the kind of player that they need. They don't have that home run element at running back, John. I think he would give it to them. Only thing with him is I want to see a little bit more in pass pro. And we don't really know what he could do as a receiver. And in this Patriots offense, your running backs, especially with Josh McDaniels back, your running backs have to be guys that can pass block and catch the football. It'll be interesting to see how he develops there, but that home run element makes him a really appealing pick here in the third round.
Yeah, John, he's one of my favorite players in the entire draft. I think he'd be a great fit for the Patriots. You and I talked about it on a previous show, how that entire running back room, they have a veteran presence. They don't have any speed. And they tried to address speed a couple of years ago when they drafted Pierre Strong. He just didn't work out. But it's been something they've kind of targeted for a little while now. So I think you're 100% right. Dylan Sampson gets to the second level. He can make big plays. I think he can be impactful in the passing game. Didn't do it a lot at Tennessee, but I think that potential is there for him to do it. And the other thing, you look at your running back room, not a lot of youth there. I mean, Stevenson, believe it or not, he's going into his fifth year. This dude that was drafted in 2021, right? So he's been here 5 years now. And of course, Gibson, I mean, that's not a long-term thing there. So I think you want to add some youth, some upside, and some legit talent. So I love your pick of Dylan Sampson there, no doubt about it. One of my favorite players really in the entire draft. So, and that brings us to pick 77. And if you look at so far, right, we have Will Campbell, then we went receiver, then we went running back, rounds 2 or 3. So I think this is where you kind of have some flexibility, right? Do you want to go edge? Do you want to go receiver again? Do you want to go defensive tackle, right? Ozzie Trapillo is still there for you, John, at pick 77. He's still available. So this is kind of an interesting one for me because I think there's
some, I mean, what's his face? Shamar Turner is sitting there as well from A&M, as is Norman Lott.
Yeah, and I think to me, and I'm shocked that Norman Lott fell this far. And if you look at this guy, and look, I know you signed Milton Williams. I know you have Christian Barmore, 6'3", 315. I think the thing with Lott, and it says it right here, not a ton of snaps in the last couple of years or so. I think less than 500 snaps over the past 2 years. So maybe that's part of the reason that he falls. And I would like to see him a little bit better against the run. And if you just compare him to Turner, right, this is a guy that maybe not quite as impactful as say a Norman Lott would be. Maybe you have a little bit more time on the field, but I think at this point at pick 77, if Norman Lott's still there, I think it's kind of not a no-brainer, but I think that's the direction you got to go.
Well, the reason I think if you go in this direction, the reason I think it makes sense from a body type standpoint, whether it's Norman Lott or even Turner, that 3 technique in this defense has to be a guy that's 6'3", 6'4", can play at 305, 310, but arm length is going to matter in terms of the 3 tech in this defense. And we've seen what the 3 tech can do in this defense in Mike Vrabel's previous stops. It's an impact position. Christian Barmore could end up having a really big season for them statistically because it's a pure one-gap technique player who's going to be allowed to attack gaps, play with lean, play with leverage. They're not going to want him to get too handsy, especially as pass rushers. They're going to want him to use his hands more on early downs or short yardage downs, obviously. But length is going to matter at the 3 technique for the Patriots. Both of those guys check that box off. This is going to be an important position in this defense. I think both of those guys fit what they look for in terms of measurables.
And I think you and I have talked about this. This is something that they've kind of lacked some depth there for a while. Like Aquale is a good rotational player, but it felt like they never replaced Lawrence Guy. And I want to add some depth there. And the other thing is Christian Barmore has looked great in offseason workouts, but he missed virtually all of last year. So a little bit of an insurance policy for him with that pick. So coming up here, we'll be at pick 106. John, you'll be on the clock. A lot of interesting options here. Again, we have a tackle, we have a receiver, running back, defensive tackle already in our draft. So a lot of different places, different areas you can go with this. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of highly productive players on the board right now, guys that were really good players that had really good college careers. When I look at what we've done so far, where we've addressed offensive tackle, We've addressed wide receiver. We've addressed running back. We've addressed defensive tackle, a position that they don't have a lot of depth there. You mentioned Aquali's gone. I think we've done a pretty good job. Now, I'm thinking about going in one of two directions here. I really like Anthony Belton. I think he could be a future right tackle for you. If not, I think he could certainly kick inside and play right guard for you. It's going to be a position when we talk about thinking about positions down the road. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Mike Onwenu comes off your books after 2026. You might have to draft ahead with a guy like Anthony Belton there. But then there's another guy that I really like here in Jonas Sanker, a guy that I've been told they really like. They met with him in the pre-draft process. He's a hybrid safety linebacker, can play the big nickel in your sub packages. He's a guy that I think would be a really good fit in this scheme because I do think he can play in the box as a screw down safety or as a rotation safety post snap. He's a guy that's really instinctive, smart, tough. I think he's good in run support, but I also think he's good in zone coverage. He's a guy that if you rob him and drop him or use him as a third safety, he could really be a nice little chess piece for you. I do think you're going to see the Patriots play more three safety looks than we think because I think they're going to play a lot of single high stuff. So with that being said, it's really a tough call for me, and maybe I need you to be the tiebreaker here. I really like Anthony Belton from a value standpoint at this point in the draft. And yes, he's a tackle, but I think he's a guy that eventually, like I said earlier, can play inside. But Sanker's that Swiss Army knife that could do a lot of different things. All of that being said, John, I'm ultimately going to go Anthony Belton here. I think they add another tackle. I've said that all along that I think they're going to come out of this draft with two tackles. I think he's the second tackle. I think when you look at him, he's got the size. I'd like to see him clean up some stuff fundamentally, and I'd like to see him maybe play at 325 instead of pushing 340. But the arm length is there. He's an experienced player. He's 24 years old. He's played a lot of football in his career at North Carolina State. I think he's a guy that's dependable, and I think he's a guy that could eventually develop into your starting right tackle. So Anthony Belton is the pick for me.
Yeah, and if you have Will Campbell at left tackle, if that works, and you have Morgan Moses at right tackle and that works, then you have at least a year or two to develop him. So it does kind of give you some time there. So let's go to pick 144 as we go down. So now we're getting kind of into the meat of the draft. John Sarianides' favorite part, those middle and late rounds, those guys that he is an expert on that most people have never heard of in their entire life. Sarianides knows all when it comes to these guys. So we just went Anthony Belton. So we technically have two tackles here. We have a receiver. We have a running back. We have a defensive tackle. So now I'm kind of looking at, is there a position that stands out to me? Like, do they want a guard? Do they want a linebacker in Barrett Carter? Isaiah Bond, his speed jumps out at me. I feel like every single time I watch him play, I'm watching him outrun somebody. But the guy that's kind of standing out to me, John, is a Barrett Carter. And I know he had some inconsistency last year, but 6'1", 230, that's almost identical size to Robert Spillane. And I think linebacker is an area, and I know they could move him around, but linebacker is an area to me where they need some depth because you have Spillane, but besides Spillane, I mean, you have Jelani Tavai, but I don't know how much of a long-term fit he is. You just moved on from Jawan Bentley. So, I mean, unless you have any big objections, John, I know this part of the draft is your area of expertise. I'm going to go Barrett Carter here.
I like Barrett Carter. I like him a lot. I like his production at Clemson. And that's where the game is going nowadays at linebacker. You talk about 6'1", 230. That's your off-ball linebacker in today's football. The thing with Barrett Carter that I love is he plays downhill, and he plays downhill fast. He can also play over the top when things are spilled to the outside. He can get over the top and make plays at or around the line of scrimmage. So I really like him as a downhill football player that you could do a lot of different things with in terms of him playing off the ball. He can walk in a mug technique and blitz, or he can walk in a mug technique and drop. You can blitz him from depth. But he's also a guy that shows some pretty good instincts in pass coverage as well, especially underneath in zone coverage. He's a little light in the pants, and I do think if teams decide they're going to run at him, he does, like most linebackers today, does have a hard time sticking lead blocks or second-level guard blocks and getting off of them. That being said, I also don't like the fact that he tries to Olay blocks at times. but I do think he's a good all-around football player, and he's a guy that could really be a three-down player for you eventually if you develop him as an off-ball linebacker. But at the very least, he can play on first and second down and come off the field in your sub packages. He can also play in some of your sub packages. So you've got some special teams value there as well. A solid value pick at this point in the draft, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, it's a position that I think, with the Spillane signing doesn't jump out as a need per se, but it is something they got to really kind of look for the future and maybe even a little bit for the present when it
I,
comes to.
I think it's more of a need than people think. You got to remember, they cut Juwan Bentley. They moved on from him. You got Tavai coming back. They cut Sione Takitaki. He's gone. They don't have a lot of depth there. You added Spillane, but they don't have a lot of depth there. And so I think this is a position that's, they gave Christian Ellis the bag, but this is a position where they're going to need a young player that can come in and compete for snaps. I think Carter can be that player. We do have a comment that has come in, and it's our good friend Ken Matthias. Kenny Matz checks in. I wanted to thank John Lyons again for that shout out earlier that sparked the conversation between you and John. Great knowledge, and as always, a great show. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate the time, brother.
Kenny, appreciate you listening, man, and watching as well.
Thanks for checking in, man. We do really appreciate it. All right.
So, John, you're up
here in our mock draft.
Pick 171. Now, this is the point in the draft, and I know, John, you are in the school of Mike Holmgren in Green Bay and take a quarterback every year. This is a point. Look, there are 3 quarterbacks of names people know with Riley Leonard, Dylan Gabriel, and Quinn, who is still on the board. But I think there's some other, legit value here, whether it's Jalen Lane, who I like a lot, right? Jalen Travis, of course, Caleb Rogers. There's some other guys there. Malachi Moore, a guy who, I think is maybe better than people give him credit for. Tonka Hemingway as well. Deone Walker, a guy I like a lot. So, yeah, the quarterbacks are there, but there's some other guys of, I think real value as well. I mean, we're in round 5. What are you kind of thinking here?
I love the names at the quarterback position here. I've said this all along that I think the strength of this draft at the quarterback position is really between rounds 3 through 6, where you can get a guy that can either develop into a quality backup, or if you develop him enough and you let him marinate a little, you might be able to get a future starter out of it. I love Kyle McCord. I think he's one of the purest pocket passers in this class. He plays big in the pocket, 6'3" and change, 220 pounds. He can throw the football at all 3 levels. He can make all throws in all 3 levels. And I think he processes the game relatively quickly, and he's got a nice quick release. But here's my conundrum, John. I think when you look at where this team is at, specifically when it comes to depth, I think it's probably a little early here to take a quarterback because, again, we're talking about a guy that's going to be your 3rd quarterback. So I probably wait around. I'm probably more inclined to take one in the 6th or 7th round. So I would want to go in another direction here. Now, Jalen Lane intrigues me as a guy that could potentially
I like him a lot.
I
mean, this is a guy that has special teams value too.
Yes. I like him as a guy that could potentially play in the slot or play the Z. You're talking about a guy that's 5'10", about $190, $195. He had a good, productive career at Virginia Tech. Yep. But again, now you're at a part of the draft here where I kind of feel like this is where if you wanted to add a 3rd corner, this could potentially be a good spot. If you wanted to go safety, this could potentially be the spot to do it. Because, again, I think if I'm going to go quarterback, I'm probably waiting around. I think
we can see the safeties that are there, like Malachi Moore, Upton Stout, right. Dan Jackson. Like, those are the guys kind of that's the area of safeties you're looking at this point.
Right. And I actually would love to go corner here. I mean, I think that they're going to see corner as more of a need than people think just because you added Carlton Davis. I don't necessarily think that you could say, all right, we're good. We don't necessarily have to take a corner. And, when I think cornerback, I really, really like Denzel Burke out of Ohio State. I know that 2 years ago, Denzel Burke was a guy that people were talking about as a possible first-round talent. Some people thought he was a top 10, top 15 talent. Really slipped up, very inconsistent the last 2 years. He does run a little hot and cold. Hasn't always necessarily played his best in big games. But you're talking about a guy that's 6'1", 190, really sticky in coverage, smooth, fluid athlete who does a great job of transitioning and maintaining hip position and staying in phase. Again, if you can get him to be more consistent, he's played a lot of football the last 3 years. He's played in big games. He's a guy that's also not afraid to stick his nose in run support and mix it up. This is a guy that I think early to middle day 3, you're getting a guy, John, that I think could step in and play a big part in your secondary if you develop him the right way. I love this from a value pick. I'm all in on Denzel Burke here.
Yeah, and what I also like here too is if you look at your corner group, right? We talked about earlier. You have Gonzalez, you have Carlton Davis, you have Marcus Jones, you have Alex Austin. So you can afford to develop a guy for a year. Like if they have some concerns about his consistency or his development, like it's not like you have to pick this guy and play him on day one, right? Like you can afford to develop him. So we'll go with Burke there, pick 171. And then we got a while to wait. 220, 2 more picks left. 220, 2. Always interesting the way these boards falls because I've done probably 7 or 8 of these simulations, and the board always kind of falls a little bit differently, especially once you get into that 3rd round or more.
Ken checks back in. If the Patriots do draft a QB, could potentially be on the active roster behind May and Dobbs, or more of a scout team or practice squad. Well, with the third quarterback rule now and where you can carry the third quarterback, I mean, depending on what they want to do with the roster, certainly they could carry a third quarterback.
Yeah, I would not be against it. I almost look at quarterback, John, and obviously you'll have the last pick. We'll see who's on the board. But I look at quarterback as kind of an undrafted free agent thing because May's the guy. You have Dobbs. So I agree. I would want to bring one in. I just would probably want to wait until the undrafted, unless there's someone that really jumps out at our next pick per se.
So can I pitch a guy to you here? I mean,
Sure.
Again, you do what you want. We're co-GMs here. And I don't care if I'm going to sound like a local yokel here and I'm pushing the local kid. F it. You're damn right I'm pushing the local kid because I've covered this kid in person for the last 3 years, and I think he's a damn good football player. And while when you look at him in civvies, he might not necessarily pass the eye test, he's technically sound, he's smart, high IQ, multi-year starter, has good genes. His dad played in the NFL at a Pro Bowl level for a long time. Can I pitch Drew Kendall to you?
Yeah, and I think the only flaw his dad had is that he played for the Jets, right? Like, I mean, that was the only thing that was wrong with him as a player. It actually says right here, right? His dad was a 1st-round pick, as you can see, and you covered him really closely. And I know, look, he's a good player, and what I'm looking at is the position, right? Because you bring in Bradbury. Is Bradbury going to be your long-term center? I mean, I don't think you even bring in Bradbury if you think Cole Strange can be your long-term center. I think that's kind of a subtle signal that they don't think Cole Strange is going to be a long-term center. So you still have that question there. That's a question you've had for a while now. I know you had David Andrews the last 10 years, but you really never developed much behind him, right? Especially once Ted Karras left and went to Cincinnati. You didn't really have a guy that you could feel or that you felt could jump in at center and play well. So, I mean, I was kind of leaning between Dan Jackson and Drew Kendall, John, and you've kind of convinced me for Drew Kendall at center. I think, obviously you have the inside knowledge of covering him. I also look at he's a good player, and the position I think is going to be important as well.
All right, we've got another comment here from Kodiak Broncos podcast. Thanks for checking in, guys. Appreciate it. You guys recommended. Love the content. Cheers from Broncos country. Back at you, man.
Hey, man.
We'd love to check out your show as well. This is a big draft for the Denver Broncos as they look to take the next step in their development under Sean Payton. Thanks for checking in, guys. Again, really appreciate it and looking forward to checking out your content as well. All right, John, I believe we have 1 pick left.
If you had not drafted Dylan Sampson earlier, I would have pitched Jaquavius Marks, they call him Woody Marks, to you. That dude's speed at the 2nd level is awesome. I know we already have Dylan Sampson. I just wanted to give him a mention because I think that's a guy that he played 4 years at Mississippi State, plus he played obviously at USC. So there's a lot of miles there. Maybe his longevity isn't a thing. I think he's going to be a guy that's not going to be a all-star, superstar player, but he's going to be a really good player and much better, I think, than people think, at least in the first few years of his career.
So it's interesting here because quarterback's not a need, but I think if you look at the quarterbacks that are on the board here right now, this is a prime spot to get that third quarterback that can develop. Now, a lot of the names that are left on the board, John, these are guys that Probably could have gone a little higher. I've covered Max Brosmer. I've seen him play in person. I love a lot of aspects of his game. I think he's a gamer. He has a quick release. He's crafty in the pocket. He's really good off action. Better arm talent than people think. He can really place the ball, especially in the short and intermediate game. Very adept at running RPOs as well. Curtis Rourke, classic pocket passer, big arm, can spray the ball all over the field. Does have some accuracy issues when you pressure him, especially in A gap and B gap. But if he's given time, he can put the ball wherever he wants. He has that size. My concern would be the limited mobility. He's not a guy, he can expand the pocket and play from within the pocket and work to a second and third read, but he's not a guy, if things break down, that's going to put it down and take off. So I do have some mobility concerns with him. Of course, his brother Nathan Rourke was with the Patriots a couple of years ago. Brady Cook, another one of these crafty quarterbacks in this era of RPOs and getting the ball out quick. He's also a really good athlete, guy that can extend plays if plays break down. He's also a guy that you could probably run some zone read stuff with. Eli Drinkwitz ran a lot of that stuff with him at Missouri. Doesn't have great size, but he's gonna run your offense. He's smart. He's competent. He's a good athlete, and he has enough arm talent that he can keep the passing game on schedule. So if you want to go quarterback here, John, I think there's a lot of good options. Graham Mertz is another guy. I'm going to give you a name here, though. Tommy Mellott, who's a quarterback at Montana State. If you're looking for a guy who could perhaps be the next Julian Edelman, this is your guy right here,
Okay.
Tommy Mellott.
All right.
He's a guy, decorated career at Montana State, one of the best programs in FCS football the last 5 years. Tommy Mellott's been one of the most productive quarterbacks in college football at any level the last 2 years. He's not a quarterback at the next level, but he's a really good athlete. He's tough. He's instinctive. He's a guy that could potentially play slot receiver for you. You teach him how to return some punts. Again, if you're looking for a Julian Edelman type, Tommy Mellott's that guy in this year's draft.
All right, John. So you went through the quarterbacks. Obviously, if you take the quarterbacks out of it, there's still some recognizable names there as well. What are you thinking with this final pick for the Patriots of their draft?
Yeah, so I think that, to me, you can go in a myriad of directions here. Ultimately, you know me, I come from that Holmgren, Elliott Wolf school of thought. Bill Belichick thought this way too. If I could, every year I would take a quarterback. It's the most important position in sports. You should be developing it on a year-to-year basis because you never know what's going to happen. We all know how important the Tom Brady draft pick turned out to be, right?
Yeah.
So I think at least every other year you should take a quarterback. I'm going to go quarterback here. And I think, in my view, I think when you look at this offense and what they're going to ask quarterbacks to do, I think that it's going to be a position where I think that you're going to need to be able to have some size, but also some athleticism. All that being said, though, I'm pivoting. Let's have some fun with this. I'm taking Tommy Mellott, and I'm going to try to develop him as a receiver and see what you can get out of him.
All right. And I think you still can get a quarterback in the undrafted sphere.
Yep.
And again, if you can come out of this draft with a long-term backup behind Drake May, even if it takes a year to develop him as your third guy, I think it can be worth it. So to review our draft, John, the New England Football Journal Patriots Pulse mock draft, you went Will Campbell at pick number 4. I went Illick Amanor, receiver, X-type receiver, big-bodied guy from Stanford in the second round. Then you went Dylan Sampson, one of my favorite players. Thank you for picking him, John, running back at 69 in the third round. Then I went Omar Norman Lott, big 3-technique defensive tackle, who we were both surprised he kind of fell, but it was nice to have him there, and it's a guy that they can definitely use as a rotational guy. You went Anthony Belton, round 4, 106, a guy that you think can develop into a right tackle over the course of the long term. I went Barrett Carter at linebacker, a position that they really need. Then you went Denzel Burke, a corner that maybe if this draft was a year ago, we're talking about him on day 2, right?
We got an F for that pick.
I know, but I think we're talking about him day 2, maybe last year. Guy that you can develop to behind all the depth you have at corner. Then I went Drew Kendall, with your help, of course, at center in a important position for the Patriots, especially long term. And then you went with Tommy Mellott, aka Julian Edelman Light, to round out our draft. So
a guy that, by the way, will probably, no knock on him, despite his production at Montana State, a guy that I think probably ends up becoming an undrafted free agent. But to your point earlier, John, about quarterbacks, I think there's going to be enough talent that's going to fall out of the draft. A guy like Max Brosmer, potentially. I think he probably goes late, but if he doesn't, that's a guy that you worked out at your local pro day. That's a guy that I've seen him play in person. He has a lot of experience. He transferred to Minnesota last year, had a really good year for the Golden Gophers. I think he's a guy that can run your offense and could be a good developmental third quarterback. I think that's kind of what you need. A guy like Brady Cook out of Missouri, as I talked about him earlier too, he could potentially fall out of the draft. So I think you're going to have some options here. You don't necessarily have to take one, but I was either going to take one of those guys or Malott. Again, having some fun with it. I think Malott could potentially be a decent NFL receiver in the mold of a Wayne Krebet or a Julian Edelman if he ends up in the right situation.
So what you're saying is he'll be the Super Bowl 63 MVP. So I like to hear that, John. Any other picks here from earlier in the draft or anything that especially stand out to you?
In regards to our draft tonight?
Yeah, just anything.
Yeah, I think the Ayumanor pick is interesting. I'm not sure he goes that high. I'm not sure he goes that high, and B, I'm not sure that they're going to see it as pressing of a need as we do. I'm not sure they take a receiver at pick 38. They very well could. I still think that they're going to be one of the teams to watch in regards to a trade-up situation at the bottom of the first, especially if all of a sudden you hear Connerly's name mentioned and Ursari's name mentioned. They may be one of those teams that may say, you know what? If they don't take Will Campbell at 4 or they don't take Will Campbell early, let's say they take an Abdul Carter, they're going to be a trade back in candidate. So that pick could be on the move anyway. I still think a name to keep an eye on for them is going to be Ozzie Trapillo. I've talked to people around that program and the scouting community that have all said the same thing to me. They love him. Of course, there's a connection there. Mike Vrabel, Bill O'Brien, Doug Marrone, these guys all go way back together. They've coached against each other. They know each other. They're friends. Vrabel's son, Tyler, played at Boston College a couple of years ago, so Vrabel has some intimate knowledge of the program and the players in the program. I think Ozzie Trapillo, especially if, let's say, they go Abdul Carter at 4, if he falls to them, Ozzie Trapillo is a name to keep an eye on in the second round. Local kid, his son Steve, his father Steve, Boston College legend, played in the NFL with the New Orleans Saints. I definitely think that that's a name to keep an eye on if they go defense at 4 or if they go to another position like a Tyler Warren in a trade down scenario. That's a name to watch in round 2.
Yeah, and we didn't do any trades in this mock, but I agree with you. I think that pick 38 could be a real candidate, especially if you pair it with 77 and you want to get up into the late teens, early 20s to target a specific player. I think that could be a real possibility, especially if they don't go tackle with pick 4. One that I would really have my eye on is, I mentioned it when I picked him, Barrett Carter. I think linebacker's one of those sneaky needs. Like, yeah, they invested a lot of money in Spillane. I know they matched the offer for Christian Ellis. I think Ellis is a special teams player on a really good team and maybe a rotational defensive guy. I think Tavai is a pretty good player when he's in a secondary role, but we saw last year when Bentley got hurt, that linebacking core went through the floor and was a major problem. They were getting run on all over the place. They were struggling in coverage. So if they take any sort of inside linebacker, I obviously have Carter here. That could be a guy that legitimately plays and by the middle of the season is contributing to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that'll do it for our mock draft for Thursday night's draft. And John, we got a couple minutes here. Let's get some final thoughts here as we wrap it up. Of course, like I said, 2 nights from now, this time we'll have a pretty good idea of what the Patriots did with their first round pick. They will have either made a pick or they will have traded down and made a pick. We'll see. But in 2 nights from now, we'll know who they took in the first round anyway.
Yeah, this time, 48 hours from now, our long national nightmare will be over, and we will know who the Patriots took at 4th overall. Maybe we'll even know that they took someone else later on in the round. But yeah, we got 48 hours, John, and we will finally have an answer. Because I think this is, again, if this was last year, like we all knew they were taking Drake May. If Joe Alt was in this draft, we would all know they were going to take Joe Alt at 4th overall. There's just a little bit more uncertainty, but you and I talked about it. I talked about it on social media today. The guys are there. They're just a little bit more difficult to find this year, but the guys are there. So I'm really interested to see what direction they go at 4th overall, especially if Hunter and Carter are off the board.
In your heart of hearts, what do they ultimately, final word, do in the first round?
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice. In my heart of hearts, I think it's Will Campbell at 4. It just that's the signals they've been putting out there for months. That's the guy that's been tied to them for months. And I think it's a safe bet to say, too, he's not going to go in the top 3, so he'll be there at 4. I wish they would trade down. And frankly, I wish they'd take a Simmons or a Warren pick in the 8 to 11 range. But just based off what we heard, I don't think the trade market is going to be super robust. So I deep down, I think it's going to be Campbell, and I know some people are going to be pissed about that. And I have some questions if he's going to be a tackle long term. But as I've said, and I maintain, this dude is going to be a great player. Maybe it's a guard, maybe it works out and it's a tackle, but you are going to get a great player if you take him, regardless of where he plays.
Well, I think a Will Campbell pick will tell us a lot about the dynamics in that front office and the relationship to Mike Vrabel. Because
I
Will
don't think
Campbell,
Elliott
to
Wolf would
me,
take Will Campbell. I don't know.
what's that?
I don't think Elliott Wolf would take Will Campbell. I think Vrabel
I don't
would,
think he
though.
would
I think
either.
you're
I think
on
that
it,
would
yeah.
be that's exactly what I was going to say. I think Will Campbell is a Mike Vrabel pick. I really do. I think if it's Elliott Wolf's call, I think that they go in another direction here. I think that they work the phones to trade down. If they don't get an offer they like, I think they go best player available, whoever they determine that might be. But then again, I think if this was Elliott Wolf still running this front office and making roster decisions, I don't think that they land half the players they landed in free agency. No knock on him. And I think their approach in terms of who they identified in free agency would have been different. So I think their needs would have been different. But I think ultimately, I think if they take Will Campbell, that's a Mike Vrabel pick. He's Tyler Lewan 2.0. He's going to come in. He's going to give you an edge. He's going to give you some leadership in that room. And he's a guy that, yeah, the arm length might not be ideal, but he's going to check off a lot of other boxes. And I think ultimately, if it came down to it, Mike Vrabel's going to be comfortable with that. And that's going to be the player. I don't look, the NFL draft is tricky. You know this. Could it be a guy like Josh Simmons? It could. But the thing with Simmons is, and I said this earlier, teams are going to have to be really comfortable with his medicals.
Yep.
If his medicals check out, yes, I think he's going to go higher than he's projecting to go. But a lot of it is going to be the medicals and how that knee has responded to rehab and treatment, because that's going to be the big question mark. At left tackle, you can't have guys, coming off of torn ACLs and wearing double knee braces.
Point. Yeah.
And knee braces are a fact of life for offensive linemen in football now. But you want them to be wearing knee braces to protect their knees, not necessarily to be bulking up because you don't want them to tear an ACL again or tear another joint. Sure. Obviously, that's going to be something that's going to have to be carefully considered if it's any team that's in position to draft him. But I do think ultimately, if they end up standing pat and the board ends up falling the way we think it does with Ward, Hunter, Carter, if that happens and they don't get a trade offer, I think Will Campbell is a pick as well. I would be shocked if they went Tyler Warren. I would be shocked if they went Jalen Walker. I think ultimately it's going to be Will Campbell. And again, as I said earlier, and I know Patriot fans may not want to hear this, John, I do think it's a safe pick, because if you ask him to move over 2 feet and he plays left guard, yes, it's not ideal, but it protects you in a way too, because he could end up developing into a really good left guard. Again, it's not like the Cole Strange pick from 2022 where he had injury issues, some consistency issues. He didn't stick at left guard, and now you're kind of sort of at the end of the road with him and you're trying him at center. I think that Will Campbell's a different deal, because it's easier to make that move from left tackle to left guard because, again, he's got the size and the measurables and certainly the fundamentals to play either position and play it at a high level. We'll see. It'll be intriguing. All I know is I'm glad that it's finally here. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty here. I'm tired of trying to prognosticate and figure out what they're going to do and talking about the prospects. Let's see who they draft. Let's talk about them once they become New England Patriots, and let's move forward to the rest of the offseason. It should be fun like it is every year nonetheless. the NFL draft, there's truly nothing like it. I'm a draft junkie. I love the drafts for all 4 major sports. I watch them all. I'm into them. But I think at the end of the day, the NFL draft is on its own when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to intrigue and drama. Nothing beats the NFL draft. So it should be a lot of fun. John, I want to say thank you for taking the time, and let's do this again next week as we recap what the Patriots do. Of course, we're going to be with you throughout this week as well, doing Patriot Pulse stuff. So stay tuned. We have to figure out when we're going to be able to do it with our schedules. But trust me, we'll be back with you again later on this week. But we're also going to recap it all next week.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, it's going to be nice to just analyze who they took instead of, looking ahead of who they might take. So I'm looking
and who
forward
they might take. And that's the thing. And again, I'm not looking for people to say, oh, wow, you guys in the media work hard. But it is a lot of work to try to figure out who they could take. And again, Elliot Wolf said this a while back, and it's so true. You pretty much know who you're going to take if you're picking in the top 10. It's chalk. It's once you get outside the top 10, now that's where it's more open to debate. We do have one more comment here before we go. And that's Ken Matthias. Ken checks back in. Appreciate you guys. Well, we appreciate you, Ken. Thanks for checking in as well. All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Patriots Pulse. For John Lyons, I'm John Sarianides. We'll be back with you again later on this week. Until then, stay safe. And as always,